All right. It is 5:04 on May 14th. I call this meeting of the Comprehensive Residential Code Review Committee to order. We're going to start with a roll call.
Jay Van Bavel.
Alex Robinette.
Dave Bench.
Oh my God. Duke Garwood.
Tom Farrell.
Very good. And we'll move on. Are there public comments that are not part of the regular package? Anybody signed up for that? No? Okay, good. All right. Then we'll move right along to the consent agenda. I'm sure that everybody's had a chance to read through. There's quite a few motions and quite a few approvals in there. Glad we got them all captured. Does anybody have a motion on that?
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the minutes of the April 9th meeting as presented.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, very good. We have discussion and possible action on emails and letters relevant to the CRCRC from April 5th, 2024 to May 10th, 2024. And that is agenda item number 3. We could go through those individually, or we can just have them in the packet. They are all posted. Is there any reason why we should? I'm sure that you folks have all had a chance to look through them, right? Would the audience like us to read those, or have you had a chance to look? Okay. Oh, you would? No, okay, very good, okay.
2 questions simultaneously.
All right, okay, very good, okay. All right, we're just gonna move on then to agenda item number 4, discussion regarding special exceptions. Could I get that up on the screen, please? We're gonna have special exceptions be probably part of our discussion later on, and I wanted to educate not only the CRC members, but the folks here that what the possibilities are around special exceptions.
Just for clarity, this is different from the special exceptions we're talking about with regard to height. This
No.
is
That
a
is?
different.
Well, this is
Yeah.
just a general discussion.
It
so,
is, but I just wanted to make that clear to people that that's what's going on.
All right, okay, yeah. Anyway, just for folks who don't know what a special exception is, I thought that it would be good to kind of bring it up. And what this is we have legal counsel who, from time to time, puts on the training session for P&Z members and BOA members. And I extracted this business here from their education packet. I had attended their training about 2 months ago, and found this special exceptions portion to be particularly useful. You know, we have a zoning board of adjustment that comes into play whenever there are any questions of special needs to be taken care of that aren't necessarily worked very well within the ordinances. And generally, whenever they are making a ruling on a particular thing, it is to get a variance for a property. And that variance, the way the state law reads is that variance can only be approved if there's a hardship that is presented. And for the most part, our Board of Adjustment works on that basis. Most everything that they talk about is done on a hardship basis. But there's another vehicle that that the P&Z can employ called a special exception, which if something is written into the building code, very specifically, an exception to what is normally part of the code, then BOA has the authority to be able to evaluate an issue against that ordinance or that and determine whether or not a special exception is appropriate for granting to allow something to happen that wouldn't normally happen within the code. So, so they actually have two tools available to them, variances and special exception. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. Well, let's move along to the next one, really. So, according to this, the special exception must be specifically set forth and be found in the ordinance provision themselves. The ordinance should include a procedure for processing and granting special exceptions. The criteria for evaluating special exceptions should be included in the ordinance, and the criteria does not have to require an unnecessary hardship. And special exceptions can be used as a relief valve for regulations where the city wants the ability to grant relief or alternative compliance. And finally, special exceptions cannot create an incompatibility. Now, would you move to the next one? Now, what's particularly interesting about this slide is the second bullet point, which is to permit such modification of the height, yard, area, coverage, and parking regulations as may be necessary to secure appropriate development of a parcel of land that differs from other parcels in the district by being of such restricted area, shape, or slope that it cannot be appropriately developed without such modification. In other words, there's some special issue around this piece of property that cannot be accommodated within the normal ordinance, and so a special exception is brought into play to accommodate it. And I think that's really kind of all I wanted to say about this.
Dave,
Yes,
are you gonna accept discussion on this, or?
well,
Well, I guess you
okay,
have discussion.
if there is discussion that needs to be had, I'd invite this group to bring it up.
Well, let me start on this. We still have to have 4 votes on the Board of Adjustment to grant a special session. It takes 4 to do that. It's not a majority, it's a supermajority. It has to be 4. If it's 4 people there, then you have to get everybody. I realize that we have this as in our quiver. Special exceptions, in my opinion, should be by the name special and not be designed specifically as we craft an ordinance to be used as part of that ordinance. I think it needs to be taken out. It just doesn't look like to me that that's a good public policy to use special exceptions as a means to, as part of an ordinance. It should be used sparingly, in my opinion.
I want to be clear that I'm not promoting special exceptions.
No,
Okay.
I'm not
But-
suggesting that.
But I know that conversation here is going to be going towards what we were asked by city council to do.
Yeah.
And one of those things was to consider special exceptions. So rather than explain what special exception is then, I thought, well, we'll bring it up now and
No,
everybody will know what we're talking about when we start.
I'm not, I think that that's probably a good way to do it. But I just think that just from just a city government standpoint, I think it needs to, I know we were drifting, the city council was trying to look at that as part of an ordinance where they were directing a good part of the relief to be special exceptions. Now, I think we should have on some, like on the height, because of the slopes of the lots, a provision for special exceptions, and it needs to be specific and do that. But I think we should have a slope part of the deal. I'm jumping into the height, I'm sorry. But I do believe that this is just from a good government standpoint, special exceptions should be used sparingly. Let me just put it that way.
Okay.
As I understand it, a special exception then would need to be written into the specific section of the ordinance you're
that's
talking
right.
about. It's not a global thing that applies.
You know, even
Across
if,
the board.
I'm not pretending to know the legalities of how to write that, Jay, but I think even if we don't write it in, you can apply for a special exception even though it's not there. So, now when you do that, you make the Board of Adjustment kind of invent the rules as they go along on that. This is new for the Board of Adjustment. I think we've had two special exceptions applications, and both of them have been denied. I'm concerned, the reason I think this is from a government standpoint, I see a lot of risk of litigation involving special exceptions.
Well, can you not just call it, like, as the code reads, there's an exception, and that would apply to lots of X, Y, and Z description. And so it is written into the code and doesn't require you to go get board approval. I mean, is that kind of the same thing that you're saying?
Yeah, I think that we would be better off having, I would, just from a government standpoint, good government standpoint, I would prefer to have our city staff approving a project, a height issue, based on having, even on a slope, based on a different criteria for that than to rely on a special exception. Now, with that said, there's gonna be times when special exceptions will apply, and that may be the 1% rather than the 10% of slope lots. And on those, I think that's a legitimate place to go. But I'd rather that be the, in my way of thinking, I think that needs to be the last resort rather than the first one that we go to. That's just
Yeah.
what my comments on that.
I think cleaner is better. I mean, just, yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, I think there's a lot of things you have to look at from that standpoint. When we have our neighbors approving a design of a house, you always get into a possibility that that you create some animosity between our neighbors on that. So I'd rather keep in city staff. We don't care if you're mad at city staff, frankly. Right, Ashley?
Yes, we
Y'all are
do.
used to it, get there all the time. So I think that's, but having that as an opportunity, as a relief valve, I'm not opposed to that. I think, but I don't want that to be the go-to deal for everything.
Yep.
So, that's it, it's not, quite frankly, I don't know that the Board of Adjustment has had enough experience on that right now that they're gonna go through a training class, or they may have already gone through this training class to figure out what that is. Cause I think it's still kind of a new item to come up on that. If I remember correctly, to get a variance, it's not just the hardship, there are 7 things that they have to find affirmatively on. And I'm not sure what the criteria that on a special, whether they have to find 6 of those 7 and not the hardship being one of the 7, to give a special exception. So, but, you know, one of the, it's inconsistent with the name in itself, in that one of the things you can't do is, I can't grant you a special exception and then a similar property that Duke has, turn him down on the similar deal. That's just not how that can work, the way I see it. So, in fact, one of the things that on the, for a variance is that I'm not granting Duke a variance that I wouldn't grant to anybody else.
Yeah.
Not that I'm gonna give Duke
You've
a
turned me down
variance.
before.
I have turned you down
Yeah.
before, but
Yeah.
that's, you know,
There-
doesn't hurt to ask him.
It is it's a curious thing. When I took this class, it was down in San Antonio, and everyone in the room taking this class was from they sell at the San Antonio area. It was the Alamo group of governments, I can't recall exactly, but there were about 40, 50 people in the room representing their various P&Zs and BOAs from their little governments around, just like Rolling Woods. And I was the only one there from outside of that area. And the fellow that was giving the presentation had said that within that group of folks, that their Board of Adjustments give out variances like candy, that you pretty much could prove a hardship just on pretty much anything. You could say, well, look, I have a hardship. I need to put a garage on the side of my house because I can't park my car where I park it today. I need to put it somewhere else. And the Board of Adjustment say, yeah, sounds pretty bad to us. We'll give you a variance. So, and then I raised my hand. I said, well, you know where I come from, that doesn't happen. It's more restricted. It's actually kind of difficult. And the fellow says, well, where are you from? And I said, Rolling Wood. He says, oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. So, anyway, it's just one of the things that came up in the conversation in the city council meeting the other night. And as I say, I thought it would be good to enlighten everybody as to what it is, what the possibilities might be, and I'm not pushing it. It's just a thing. So, any other discussion around it? All right. We'll then move on to agenda item number 5, which is discussion and next steps following April 17th, 2024 council meeting on building height discussion. I did not have the pleasure to be part of that group on April 17th, but I went back and reviewed the video and have since written to City Council to get clarification. We had 3 takeaways from the hour and 42 minutes of discussion around building heights. The first was City Council had directed us to gather public input. Maybe we're moving a little too hastily on this, and maybe we haven't heard from enough people in the public, and another month won't hurt. The second thing was, based on public input, look for opportunities for compromise. Don't shut it out. See if there's something out there that we can all agree to and that we can move along and everybody at least be semi-happy about it. And then the third thing was, and there was a lot of discussion around this, and I think legal counsel there at that time was actually semi-educating our city council on these things, is consider the possibility of a special exception to meet the requirements. So with those 3 things in mind, we are meeting tonight, and principally we expected to listen to the public. We are delighted that you are all here this evening. We have not had a group like this before. This is kind of a treat for us. We're generally talking among ourselves. We kind of know what each other think, and if there is someone who would like to speak about their own preference with regard to building heights, we are eager to listen to that. And so with that, I'm going to open up the floor to public discussion. Please do. Yes. Somebody always has to be first.
I have a quick handout.
Very good.
So I'm Amy Patillo, 3 Rockaway Cove. And so I came today after also having listened to the council discussion. I was in Costa Rica and tuned in from afar to listen to the live stream because I had heard that it was going to be an important discussion, and I think it was worth my time to have listened. And so one of the things I observed from that conversation was that there is an effort right now to send back the height issue to this body to look at it and to consider more conversation. But it did seem like maybe the council was willing to take a piecemealed approach to our code. And so I felt like it was probably a good time to come back again to ask for the same thing that I've asked for several times now as part of this process, and to clarify it and to see if I can get it here, and then I'll be back every time we get to any other zoning area that might impact it. And that is that there are a significant number of lots in the city that have drainage easements that are part of the drainage infrastructure of the city. The map that I've given you gives you one idea of the number of lots that might be affected. So if you see the creek, the Eanes Creek line, most of the lots that are on Eanes Creek have some type of drainage easement on them. Most of them are sloped. And then there's also this little system that goes right here and right here. And my house is on this system that are the flood zones that are in the city that have been identified. And this is part of, by the way, this is part of the IIP report, and this is from 2016. This is the 2016 flood map. Things have changed since then, but this is what we have right now. If you live along any of those properties and you have a drainage easement and you have any type of flood zone or flood plain in your property, this is what you take with you when you go get your flood insurance. And it impacts your rates. So the reason I bring that up is there are also lots that aren't in floodplains and flood zones that have drainage easements in the city. The city is in the process of trying to get more drainage easements also as part of some different projects that are happening. And my concern is that if we start piecemealing the different zoning changes that are going to happen, I think we're missing the opportunity to actually address what could be progressive building practices that could be put in place in the city in order to get ahead of what's happening with flood zones and floodplains, which is that every 5 years or so, there's a new map that's put out that shows more and more of the properties along these waterways being included in flood zones, and more expense to the property owner of acquiring flood insurance. And one of the best practices that exists if you are building on a lot that may have a flood issue is to first build up out of the floodplain. So my concern with adjusting the height ordinance, at least the way that I'm understanding it, is on most of those lots that I have looked at that have drainage easements, they're sloped. And part of what has allowed property owners to try to build out of the flood area as much as possible is this 10-foot allowance that has been there. That has been, I think, kind of part of the fail-safe that has allowed many of these lots to be developable. I would propose that if we adjust that and take away that allowance, some of our lots that are in those flood zones, people are going to start building out in addition to up. And so instead of us taking a progressive step right now to acknowledge that we're going to start seeing the amount of people's lots that are included in flood areas increase, which is what we've seen the last 2 times the maps have come out, what it feels like is that we're now penalizing lots that aren't flat. And one of the things that I experienced when I was working on the tree ordinance is people constantly commenting that this is rolling wood, and they would emphasize the wood part. I would say right now I would emphasize the rolling part. More of the lots in the city are sloped than not sloped. This is not a city of flat lots. And so the accommodations that have been put in the code in the past are there to address the fact that it's rolling wood, not flat wood. And so our preferences, like, and I agree with the conversation that's happened. I'm not super excited about the idea of a special exception for all sloped lots. And from the conversation that I saw, it seemed like there was an emphasis on maybe sloped lots that are extremely sloped, which not all the ones that have drainage easements are extreme sloped, but mine is over 10 feet sloped and does have a third of my property that is a drainage easement. I mean, that's part of what I knew when I bought my property. But what has changed since I bought my property are the floodplain maps. The floodplain maps have expanded the portion of my property that is now considered in the flood zone. That was nothing that I did. That just happened to my property, right? And so, unfortunately, Duke built my home, and he built it in a portion of the lot that is up.
Did you say unfortunately?
No, I said fortunately, yeah. I think there are a lot of wise practices that were put into place over time to build on those lots that have unique drainage easements like this one and are sloped. So I guess the main thing I came to ask for is I had asked the council when this process started to consider adding a special zoning district for lots that have drainage easements. And the survey went out and it was really broad. It was, should we consider special zoning districts for all these different things? It didn't, I actually would have answered no to that because it was too many things. But I think that if you look at, if we were to look at, are there specific types of issues that if we created a zoning district for those types of issues, the way that the survey question put it is that should we make zoning districts for unusual lots? Well, actually, the number of lots that are sloped and have drainage easements in the city are not unusual. It's actually quite a few of them. And so I don't know that we're making an exception for unusual lots. I think that it's important to have a code that actually accommodates as many different types of lots as we can. And so I also, when I came to the first public comment period, for this body, I commented and said, I'd really like to see a special zoning district or something to the equivalent for lots with drainage easements. And that's really what I'm here for, is what do we do with the lots that have drainage easements? How do we incentivize people who potentially have a drainage easement plus are in a flood zone or plain to, when they're building their homes, build up and not out? And I think that there's an opportunity here to do that. And I'm happy to participate in doing that, but I just wanted to bring it back up to this body as an issue that I think needs to be addressed before we pass the height ordinance, because at some point in time, if you do height and then you also increase the setbacks, you're shrinking the portion of lots that people who have lots like myself can build on that actually get us out of the floodplain and out of the area that's most prone to flooding. So, thank you.
Thank you. You haven't talked about that. Say, okay,
Do y'all be calm to that? Or?
please,
Okay.
please.
All right. All right. Don't faint.
Wow. Thank you. Wow.
Okay. Long-time listener, first-time attendee. Jeff Ezel. I live at 4709 Timberline. I've followed this since day one, since this actually came up and was initiated a little over a year ago. Had a chance to speak with a few people before this really got started, and this is kind of the culmination of where we started, where we are, and where we're potentially going. But I will be very blunt. I have concerns, big concerns about some of the proposals. Specifically, I do not believe statistically or mathematically they are supported by the residents or anything that is in the data set available. The first page, you'll see it's just the agenda. I'll slowly walk through that. But when you look back at what the CRCRC was originally formed, was to find a path forward to keep certain homes that were built from happening again. And I think we can all recognize that there are a few that have been built that are egregious and are probably outside the scope or bounds of what anybody would want. That being said, there's other things that this was supposed to take into consideration. Thus, it was a comprehensive plan. Now we are at the stage where things are being piecemealed. On the January 22nd meeting, Nikki actually brought it up, saying we need to think about this from a comprehensive position, especially as it relates to the city and our implementation and rewriting of the code. At that time, CRC agreed and noted that anything that would be presented to P&Z would be done just for an introductory purpose. Since then, we have shifted off that course, and now things are not only going on an introductory basis, but they're being pushed all the way to council and being brought up for the intent of getting drafted. That is not what this committee was originally formed for. Secondarily, the mandate and the deliverable in your formation doc specifically notates that things should be brought forth that have a majority basis in support. I will go through this and all of the data that's out there, and this is what this document does, and show that that support does not exist in the cumulative basis that is being presented. The thing that I have heard, and I completely agree with, is that we are a topographically challenged community that does not make it easy for building on every lot the same. This is not Buda. We did not raise 50 acres of cedar trees, and it's perfectly flat. We have a lot of topo, and if you go to a website, I've got it notated, maps@equatorstudios.com. Every single lot in this neighborhood has topo of some sort, between 18 inches, probably is the smallest, up to 40 feet for Mr. Clinton's 60 feet for his lot. Over 50% of the lots have greater than 5% topographical change. When you get rid of the relief that is in place for lots with topographical change, you are creating a hardship that is unfair. It is not neighborly, and it is not what we should do. And to push this to a special exception that becomes political, requires a supermajority vote, or takes it out of the hands of the homeowner or home buyer, is not how we should set up our government and our ordinances. So, we'll move forward. Y'all issued a document in about February or March, I can't remember, I have the link here, item number 2, that essentially put forth how you came up with your data set. It was in these 6 items: the 2021 Comprehensive Strike Force Survey, 78 emails from 69 individuals, the actual CRCRC survey results, plus the study of new and old homes, a public workshop, and research of nearby cities and building codes. The important part is the part in the dark blue boxes. These are the items that compromise or consist of the data that is supposedly shows the support for the proposals at hand. Before I get into the specific results, I want to notate a couple things that were in that document. The first one of them is a supporting item. It said that the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Strike Force Survey didn't even ask the question, do you want change to residential building rules? Well, if you go into the results, it said that 30% of the responses actually cited concerns over building trends. Well, guess what? That's a 3-year-old survey. Secondarily, to make the assumption from a non-existent survey questions that it's applicable to today's issue is irrelevant. But the more important part is, what was question number 1 of your survey? Are you okay or happy with building trends? It exists. This is irrelevant data point. Secondarily, you went to the 2023 emails, 78 in total from 69 individuals, and your comment from the CRCRC's position was that 47% in favor of changes, 28% asked for limited or careful study, and 15% change, preferring no change. Well, that was an unsolicited email with no context. It could have said anything. But specific to the proposals now, let's dig into the data that was in those emails. 31% of those even mentioned a concern of height. You know how many of them mentioned tinting? None. The next one that came up was the CRC's actual proposal that was issued to the P&Z when they brought forth the height and the tinting a few weeks ago. They provided additional summary charts that were used to show that there was support beyond the actual tallied votes that are shown in the survey results. Well, when you look at those reports, they are not additional supports. All they really are is relational comparisons. And it said, if you voted yes for one, how did you vote for the other questions? They do not add support. They do not hurt or help. They're relational comparisons. As to what they do, I don't know, but they're not supportive and they shouldn't be positioned as such. All 4 of those summaries are in there. Do that. They add no more support. There's some links you can look it up. My point here is, of all the data points that have been mentioned, the only one that matters and is relevant is the collective survey results, and that is where we should be looking. And one thing I want to say in summary, which was my first bullet point on this section 2, is that there's a lot of discussion that there's incoming emails and phone calls and communication of support. That may be true, but that doesn't mean it's a unique medium or user or a unique data point. All of those responses, support or not, should have been counted in the survey. If they are not, it's conjecture. We don't know. It could be duplicative, and if it's not, we have no way to prove it. So just because you have 4 emails from Tammy, that doesn't mean it's 4 votes supporting anything. I'm on the beginning of the survey results. I'm going to walk through this because I wanted to know was maybe there's something that the committee does know that I do not know. So as opposed to doing a relational comparison, I went through and read every single comment. If you look down at the write-in comments, I then built a table for each write-in comment. Each individual user could have had 1 more comment of the things that they specifically noted. So, are you generally satisfied with the trend of new construction? Over half supported yes. But then I thought, well, clearly height is the number 1 thing. I would assume this was the number 1 thing talked about. 31 did. 31. You know how many talked about tinting? 4. So we're not even talking big write-in votes. But these are the comments that were brought and handwritten by the respondents. Let's go to the next question. Do you think Rollingwood should consider changes to its building code? Yes, 63%. Key item to think about and remember is it says consider changes. This is not carte blanche. This is opening the opportunity to continue to delve in and dig deeper. Here's the write-in concerns again. Height and setbacks were 1 and 2. Tinting, 7. Number 3, is Rollingwood's maximum residential height of 35 feet? 64% said about right. The thing that you have to remember about this is specifically to the base maximum height of a flat lot or a sloped lot. It does not take into consideration any type of topographical relief. So from that standpoint, it is only about the 35 feet base height. Here's where we get into the real crux of the issue. Is there support for the parallel plane or not? Question number 4. The CRC results of the question, should we look at alternative ways to measure building heights, is the first question. Top left, 172 votes said yes, we should look at alternative measurements, which is great. And I commend y'all for what y'all have done because it's not easy. And this is a hard topographical region to take everything into consideration. So you put forth 3 options. The first option, as a sub-question, if you voted, which option is preferred? So the first one is measuring the measuring the height from the average slope. Second one is using the average elevation of the building footprint from the major corners. And the third one is the parallel plane methodology. So you scroll down and you look. 75 votes chose parallel plane. Well, what fast math tells you is if you take just those who voted for options, 75 divided by 123 is about 60%. 60% would get you majority support, but that mathematically is flawed. First of all, let's look at the fact that there was 172 votes. Where did those 50 votes go? We're missing 50 votes. Let's pretend that we take those votes into consideration. Let's go to the next page and I'll tell you the answer how those 50 people voted. Because guess what I did? I read their responses. So, now let's take the people who voted no off the table. So you're at 175 as your denominator. Take 75 divided by 175, that's about 43%. You have lost your majority vote. You've lost your majority vote. Now here's the thing that you forgot though also. Just because somebody voted no doesn't mean their vote doesn't count. This is not a basketball game where there's an elimination round. They get the opportunity. Think of when we do the elections. Just because your candidate doesn't win in the primaries doesn't mean your vote doesn't count in the general election. So here's where we're at a conundrum. Right now, you have, for parallel plane, 28% of the vote. The number one vote was no. No changes. But let's pretend you have an option. The first option is you do nothing because you don't have the support. The second option is you have to find out what the community wants. And right now you don't know. You don't know. If you take those 55 votes that happen to be missing on the prior page, you'll see that one of them said, I want 1 or 2. One of them said 1, 2, or 3. 20 of them had a write-in vote but were a little unsure about what they wanted. Even though 29 of them selected yes, they didn't even provide a comment. So we don't know what they were thinking. One person out of those 50 missing votes selected the parallel plane. There is so much data that has not been taken into consideration, and the support is not there for the parallel plane. We'll go to the next one. Question number 10. Should we develop a set of tenting rules? You know what's interesting about this one? Anyone? There's support. There's support. This is the only thing that you can clearly look the community in the eyes and say, I'm hearing you. I'm loud and clear. But we are so caught up on measuring height. And ironically, that's what we were caught up on when this originally came to City Council and before CRCRC was even formed, was that parallel plane proposal was on the table. Number 18. I kind of regret putting this in here now after hearing Amy because I believe what she said is right. The only reason I put this in here is because it was semi-related to the special exceptions. If you read through the community, so they said no, the community said we don't want this, but they said it's specific to the special zoning. But if you read through the notes and the write-ins, they said, look, this is confusing, complex. How do we determine which lots qualify? There's controversy associated with establishing these. There's a general concern of treating each lot equally and fairly. And here we are. So, item 4 and 5 are actually examples. The first page is examples of concerns. The second page is examples of unintended consequences. These are real. These are big problems. This all goes back to 2 things. 1, pushing through with a plan that is not supported and not close. You have 27 to 28% of the vote. And secondarily, we don't understand how this will fit together with floodplains. with trees, with setbacks. The CRCRC was initiated from a comprehensive standpoint. It had a deliverable mandate to deliver proposals with a majority support. That's what I encourage us to get back to. My last page are some quick thoughts. Why are we allowing 4-story homes? That's like such low-hanging fruit. Such low-hanging fruit. Make proposals that don't create winners and losers. These are my neighbors. These are your friends. Why are we treating them like they did something wrong just because their lot may have topographical change that one of us don't have? Let's treat each other as such, friendly and neighborly. Third, let's focus specifically on what the community supports. The data is there. Don't misinterpret it. Let's just look at it what it is, and let's use it to our advantage to create a progressive, I'm going to steal Amy's words again, a progressive building code that is helpful and valuable, not destructive. And finally, don't do this on a one-off basis. Focus on the comprehensive approach. I didn't say this coming up, but I want to say it now. I'm very thankful for each of you. It probably comes across that I don't entirely agree with everything, but that's just opinions. That doesn't mean I don't respect each of you. Y'all have given up so much time of your life to sit up here and trudge through this and come up with ideas, and so I'm thankful. I'm just encouraging you to let's get back to what our goals were, and let's keep our neighbors in mind and treat everyone equally. That's all I got.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
You brought this house up to me in our conversation. I can't mention where it is, but we talked about it. I sent
Yeah.
you a picture of it.
Yes.
You cited this as a house that could not be built under what we're suggesting, that it was unfair to them, the amount that they'd spent on their architecture.
I said it might not fit.
And
There's
it
a
has
difference.
10 feet of slope, and I showed this to you.
Correct.
And so, under our current rules, they have designed this house. This is the reference datum. This is their 35-foot height. This is their 10-foot height difference down here.
Correct.
And I have taken the contour and I have mirrored it
Right.
35 feet up. They could build higher.
Do you also remember my other comment, which was based on the fact that topographical change happens on the far end of the lot, it works. What if that topographical change would have happened under the body of the house? It wouldn't have worked. And that's my point, is you can't pick one property and pull it out of context for the entire neighborhood.
I understand, but I actually have. I've gone through so many properties in this neighborhood, I'm kind of sick of it. And there's only about 3 or 4 that get trapped out by this, because that is the goal, is to take houses that are intentionally, purposefully tall and cut the top off. And everybody else can keep doing what they're doing. And it all fits within this umbrella. It is not this highly restrictive thing that is going to ruin everybody's life.
I will go through those with you one-on-one, and we can bring it up on the 28th, but I disagree with you. And I have a lot more that do not work.
Yeah.
And here's something else. I'm glad you brought it up. Do you know what one of the major problems is with the parallel plane? It's going to force flat-roofed homes. And here's why. When you go to a ridge line, a homeowner is going to have the choice. Do I want to build a pitched roof, and maybe that's at a slope that creates 8 foot of attic space, or do I want to incorporate that into my conditioned space? Well, somebody who wants a bigger home is going to be more interested in a flat roofed home. It's going to push people, and when you layer on the tenting.
They can do that now.
Huh?
They can do that right now, and they are doing it.
Correct, that's right.
So
But that's the difference though. Here you have 10 feet of relief. Yeah. Go ahead, Duke.
I love what you're saying. but I do disagree with the last comment about it's gonna force more flat roof designs.
Okay, can I ask you a question then?
Yeah.
Do you believe, and this is a question for all y'all, do y'all believe you have support for the parallel plane after understanding the math?
Absolutely.
How do you explain?
Absolutely.
Dave, can you walk me through that empirically?
Well, here's the thing. Yes, it's true, yeah. Whenever you take the numbers and you divide them out and you get to 28%, you say, oh, well, 28% doesn't represent what the public is saying. The public is saying that they want something done, all right? The public doesn't necessarily say, I want you to do this very thing. I want you to make sure that those walls don't go up more than 42 feet, because the one that's next to me right now, it's 44 and that's too high. We're not looking for specifics. The way you portray this, okay, the way you portray this is that this was a ballot. That we all went to the ballot booth and we took this and we said, okay, this is what I'm voting for.
What do you think a
That's the way
survey is then?
It is. It's a survey.
It's not a vote.
It's a survey. We're trying to get the public opinion, trying to get the tone of the public, trying to find out what the public's displeasures are. What are the things that the public wants us to address? What are they? They're not saying, oh, this is a design criteria, this is the way this ought to be designed. What they're saying is, there are things going wrong in Rollingwood. City Council, please do something about it. City Council says, P&Z, look at this. P&Z says, we'll create a commission that looks at these kinds of things in a comprehensive manner. That's what we're doing. It's the big picture.
So,
Go ahead, Tom. I think you're.
well, let me kind of go over three things. I'll go through. First of all, yes, it's a comprehensive plan, and it's important that we look at that as a comprehensive plan. Certain sections, unless I'm misunderstood, we've been back to City Council, and City Council wanted to look at chapters. Am I not correct, Dave?
Can you define what a chapter is?
Well, heights, let's just call it that. Different issues that came up. Each one that we've submitted has been, we voted for discussion only, and that's what we did. To send that up to get exactly what we're getting, which is great as far as I'm concerned, because we want to hear that, the different ideas that we have on this. And that's a real important thing. This was not I think Alex has worked incredibly hard on this, and that's my third point. I think this is either the third or fourth time that I have worked in 40 years on height, determining how we do height in Rollingwood. I don't think there's been a time there's been more than 3 people involved in it to make that decision that we've had. Most of the time, we would have 2 council members that we would end up with a compromise between those 2 council members, and that's what we've had on that. We have some problems with how we did height. Staff had some problems. There were some definitional problems that we had between the Universal Building Code and our code. So we did make some changes on that. Are there gonna have to be major changes or how we do it? You know, I don't view this as a real major change. Do we need to take into account the topography of lots? Absolutely. I think that's a very important thing that we do, that we come up with on that. And especially lots that have high slopes. And I think I've already got on my soapbox about the special exceptions. I think that's more of a slippery slope than I think I'd prefer to go with right now, because it's unknown, number one. Number two, yes, you're dealing with potentially causing bad feelings among our neighbors, and I couldn't agree more. Number one thing in a small city is to make sure that we don't create division within our city. Number one, couldn't agree more. And yes, the consequences of any of these things, there are going to be some, we have to have an outlet. And maybe that is the special exception, but that needs to be, quote, special exception rather than go to first, in my opinion. And so I think that we can make these changes. But this is not something that we don't want to hear about. I mean, it's not something we go by
Yeah.
what we can do as we get there. The truth of the matter is, without a survey, you still got a very wide range of opinions that came on this committee. And that's what we do. That's why they picked us, is we each add something. We're not universal on our thoughts. And I think that's important to look at too. I mean, I didn't look at the survey, quite frankly, as a vote. I looked at it as informational that came in on that. But, you know, I would rather listen to my fellow members who have a lot of more experience about it than I didn't know diddle about tinning when this started. I probably would have just said no, frankly, because I didn't know what the hell it was, how it'd be. And I thought Alex and Duke has kind of at least led me to where I understand it. And, well, I don't know whether I like it or not, but it's something I understand now. The height issue we have to do, and I couldn't agree more with you on this. We don't want winners and losers on this. And so we want to be fair to everybody, and we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to use their property. And I agree with Amy that yes, we don't want to create more watershed than we have to have on that, because we all have to deal with that. Drainage was number one on everybody's list that I've seen so far that came out. So if we're creating an issue with that, then we need to kind of be cognizant of that and make sure we do it. But I've never dealt with a height issue that has gone through as much detail, as much work to get empirical data than this committee has to get there. I mean, it may be that we didn't do it right for the last 40 or 50 years, but you know, regardless of that, this has been a lot of work that when I say committee, I really mean Alex and Duke and Jeff, I think, has put in a lot of work on that. So I think it's, you know, is it finished? Can we make the adjustments we need to make? Sure, that's what this was designed for. And but I don't want. We haven't changed our goal as to where we get there. We want to have something that is easily understood, but not manipulated, which is what we've had the problem with on that. And unfortunately, as a government, you end up sometimes, and we're going to try not to do that, is to make rules for the very few bad actors that affect all of us, that we're not bad actors. So, you know, it's a balancing act, and we're going to try to do the best we can on that, and send it in. And as we send each of these issues in, that's the input we want to get back on that. That's the whole intent of that. So we're not trying to say, gee, this is it. We're not going to listen from there on out. So I appreciate your comments, and I certainly appreciate your work, although it'll take me a while to digest it all.
And I want to add, what you're saying is you guys are here giving us feedback.
Yeah.
But you spent a lot of time saying that any feedback we got that wasn't in the survey shouldn't be considered.
Say that again.
You kind of outlined, I painted the picture of the history of kind of how did we get here, so that people understood that we didn't just decide to do this, that there were, you know, the strike force, which is still happening, so it's still current. You said it's 3 years old. We started to get emails. You said that none of those things are valid. If we've had a phone call or a conversation or an email, then none of this is valid. You're saying that everything has to come from the survey, but the survey was intentionally vague because we didn't have the questions yet to ask what people wanted. And so it was important to cross-reference. If somebody did say, no, I'm not interested in that, I had to see, well, what are they interested in? That's relevant. That's why we had so much opportunity to comment, so that, you know, and we got dinged for using ChatGPT. and I'm gonna explain that. We use that at the very end. When we got the data and everybody's comments, the first thing we did was cull everything by question, yes, no, about right, too little, too, and then we color-coded keywords. I did searches to see what, just like you did, what are the most popular words that are coming up. We all had a spreadsheet where we could each go question by question and read the various columns to see what people said. And, you know, I would color code it so that if people didn't want to read everything, they could see the key points. Then at the very end, when we had to summarize each question, I took the yes column or the no column and I put that into ChatGPT. I didn't go out into the world and ask ChatGPT to solve some problem for me. I just said, summarize this list so that it was not biased. Because if we had tried to summarize it, we might have, you know, inherently biased our viewpoint. So I let ChatGPT just say, what did all these people that say yes say? Here's the summary for anybody that wanted to read it. I actually didn't spend a whole lot of time reading what ChatGPT wrote because I had already looked at what everybody said, so.
So 2 comments to that, and I'll put a bow on this so others can speak. But my point about these alternative sources of data beyond the survey made the assumption, which I bet most people in the community did, which was code was going to be derived based on how the survey results yielded. So, knowing that, just because somebody sent an email, that doesn't mean that same person gets 4 votes. And that was my point.
Yeah.
And we didn't count it that way.
You couldn't. It's
No,
impossible.
Well, we didn't.
Yeah, because
know,
you
I
don't
mean,
know it was a unique
You know,
survey. You
I
don't
think,
know who
I think
voted.
we've always made the point that, you know, that you can look at the numbers in the survey, you can see the percentages of people that said yes or no, but the real story was in the comments. And you point that out yourself, the real story is in the comments. That even though somebody might have said, even if somebody had said, left it blank on any of these questions, many of the people who left questions blank, yes or no, didn't say yes or no, put a comment in there to illustrate, I have a concern about this particular thing, but I'm not sure how to answer it. But it told us something. All of this, all of the comments provide us with an information in particular. It gives us the tone of where, for our direction, where we think we need to be going. Doesn't give us precision, but it does give us direction.
I think the, you know, where I am is looking at this and going, okay, we have, yes, every lot in Rollingwood is going to be different. And that's great. I think that's better for all of us as people to have that and recognize that as we go forward. But generally, you're going to look at a class of lots that say have a slope of 20% on an average slope, because again, we don't want to get to a place where we leave the opportunity to manipulate our ordinance to get additional height. And unfortunately, when that's done, it's done, and we'd live with it for the next 50 years, 100 years, or however long it's going to be. I won't, but maybe some of y'all younger people will. But anyway, you're going to see that I think we could put a class in there that said, okay, at 20% average slope of a lot, then they would have a different calculation. I think that's a fair deal, and that's the input that I'm looking for to get. I think you know, there's a proposal that's been submitted that does that, and I think it's got a lot of merit to come in on that. So the input we get is not closed. It's you're giving it to us, and that's great, and that's exactly what we want to hear on this. So, but I appreciate the fact that you've gone through a lot of work to do that. That's great. I think that's very helpful to me anyway, to see. But I don't want to, you know, we won't be through this. We'll make a recommendation to P&Z. P&Z will make a recommendation to council. Council ultimately makes a decision on this. So there's a lot of opportunities for it to change. I hope it doesn't become a camel, but it could. We'd rather have racehorses. So we'll see how it works out. But that's this has been the most detailed process we've ever gone through that I'm aware of in the history of Rollingwood to get to a height deal that's fair or that has some type of basis to go through on this. So, but I do appreciate all that work you did on that.
I think we all do. There's a lot of work that went into this, and I'm looking forward to going home and really kind of going through it in more detail. It's kind of hard to digest it in real time. So, thank you.
Are you ready?
All right.
Okay. Hi, I am Wendy Hundley. I live at 401 Vale Street. I first moved into Rollingwood in 2009, and I actually lived at 2502 Bettis, which was our home for 10 years. And it was a pretty flat lot. It was a ranch-style house. It had an addition put on it, a 2-story addition, and it was a wonderful house, and we loved it, and we lived there. Down the street from us, after living there for 10 years, we found a lot that we had always admired had gone for sale. And it was an original owner who had lived on that lot since the 1960s. And it's just, I don't know if you probably all know Rollingwood pretty well, but our lot is on Vale and Bettis, and it's right up next to the Zilker Nature Preserve, and it has a sign on the back that says Rollingwood on an old rock wall that was built in the 1960s. And so we love this neighborhood, and we love the trees, and we love the topography, and so we decided to purchase that lot. And so we thought we might be able to renovate that house, and so we hired an architect who we really liked the style of, like the modern hill country aesthetic. And one of the reasons that we liked that architect was because they are able to really step a lot down that has a lot of topography. And so the lot that we ended up purchasing does have a lot of topography, and there are challenges working with that kind of topography. And so before I go further, I have some stuff that I'm going to pass out to you, but I have lived here for a long time now, not as long as some of you guys. I've had the great pleasure to serve on the city council for 4 years. I've been up there. I've been through the comprehensive commercial process. I know it's not easy to be receiving a lot of feedback. So I just want to thank you for the work that you're putting into this, the time, the effort, on behalf of my family and my community. You're not up here because you don't love Rollingwood and because you don't love the community. I know that you do, and that's why you're putting your time and effort into this. So thank you for that, and thank you for taking the time to listen to us today, and to hopefully, like I'm hearing, come up with some, maybe not perfect for everyone, but something that really considers all the different viewpoints that you're hearing, and maybe come up with a solution that can fix some things. And I will say, there have been some houses that have been built that I understand the concern. I have the same concerns that our neighbors have. I think a lot of us know the houses we're talking about. I do know that the city council did come in immediately for a quick fix, and they went ahead and they made the change so that I think the houses that sort of game the system cannot be built the way that they were built before. And what would happen is somebody would, even outside of the building area, take the highest point of the lot and then use that to as their reference datum to game the system. And then they would build up from there, when their lot, in fact, was not all at that elevation. And so the city council, I think rightly so, came back and they did make that change right away once that issue was brought to light, that was how somebody was gaming the system. But I am actually here because my home was in your packet today, and I saw it in there, and I was like, This is my house. And so I haven't commented around the neighborhood or to people. I have a lot of people asking me or emailing me or asking my opinion, and I have yet to really start commenting or participating because I just don't feel like I understand. And if my house is actually under this proposal conforming, I don't understand how. And so I'm here today to kind of see if you can give me some education on how that would work. And so I brought this, I'll pass it out.
Did you say conforming or non-conforming?
It's supposed to be conforming, from what I understand. So I'll walk you through what I have here because as things in my life go, this makes a lot of sense to me, but usually my stuff doesn't make a lot of sense to other people. So the very first page here is just a cutout of my elevation, my front elevation of my house. And the reason that I blew this up here is so that you can see all of these different references in a big format, because when you go to the second page, when you go to the north elevation, you'll see that the writing is really small. But here, if you look at the first page, I marked in 3 different colors. The very lowest one that's orange is the lowest grade. The yellow one is the reference datum, and the green one is the highest point, the 35-foot height restriction in the neighborhood. Now currently, because we have a sloping lot, our lot doesn't slope just from front to back. Our lot slopes from front to back. It dips in the middle, so it also slopes from side to side, and then it slopes very deeply to the back. So we don't slope one way or another, we slope always. And so I did go ahead and print out like the north, east, south, and west elevations for you to see, because I guess part of the question I have is what reference datum are we using in these calculations? So here on my property, because we have a steeply sloping lot, we have 10 feet that is given back to our lot, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to build a flat first floor. So that's what that first page is. So if you go to the second page that says north elevation, then this is looking at the front of my house. The front of my house, our architect was asked to clarify comments, and they asked them to put the reference datum to show how our house was conforming to 35 feet. So they went back in and they put the reference datum, which is this yellow line here. The yellow line, between the yellow line and the orange line, that is the additional 10 feet that we are given for our lot, because that's our lowest elevation on our lot up to the reference datum. Now, you'll see on the side, you can see where the lower floor is, our main floor, our upper floor, and then the green line at the top is the highest point of our house, which is the 35-foot highest that you can make the house. And so you see from the front, we're at 45 feet, not at the front. At the front, we're more than 35 feet because we built on top of the old house that was there. That's the north elevation. So if you go to the next page and you go to the east elevation, you'll see where our lot slopes. You can see that darker black line where our lot slopes. And that's where you can see between the orange and the yellow, that's the additional 10 feet that our lot was given. And between the yellow and the green, that's the 35 feet of our house. So our house on this side, on the east elevation, if you look at it, from the lowest floor to the highest point is more than 35 feet because we've got the additional 10 feet. If you go to the south elevation, which is the next one over, that is looking at our house from the back. And that's probably the easiest place for you to see it because you walk into our house on the second floor basically, and the floor below that is what we call the basement. It's really sublevel. It's built into the wall of the cliff, sort of not cliff, but the slope that we have. And so that bottom part right there, we have like an 8-foot basement down there. Then we have our 11-foot windows, and then we have our second floor, and it goes up to 35 feet. So that's the south elevation there, and you can see that we have the 8 feet plus the 35 feet, that's 41 feet, or 42 feet. I think it's 9 feet, not 8 feet. So if you go to the west elevation, this is our most steeply sloping part of our lot, and that's where you can see that we have the very lowest elevation that we have, and then we have the 10 feet between the orange and the yellow, and then the 35 feet between the yellow and the green. So this, to me, when I look at it, our property has utilized the additional but the additional part that's given to a lot so that we could build the footprint that we wanted. I would say if we weren't able to have built the second floor or the third floor, whatever way you want to look at it, we have basement, first floor, second floor. If we hadn't have been able to build the second floor because we would have been restricted only to the basement and the first floor at 35 feet, then we would have had to build out more in a U shape to get the kids' bedrooms and my husband's office that we wanted to have for space for the kids. And so we would have had to take out some really mature trees. We would have had to take more of our lot up, use more of the lot up to do it. And this way we really just built into the footprint of the house that had been there before, and then we added a garage, and then we added our pool and deck. So we were able to build in a pretty small footprint. If you go to the last page, this is what was included in the CRCRC packet. These were pictures of my home, and it shows the nearest adjacent grade, and it shows that the front of the house is 27 feet tall, which is not, I can't figure out that math. And then it shows that the east elevation is 35 feet from the garage, and then it shows the west elevation, and it doesn't really show what that is, but that one is absolutely 45 feet from the lowest grade. So it appeared to me when looking at the pictures that the nearest adjacent grade that's being used in this is the highest elevation on my lot. And so I am very confused. I don't understand, because I have different elevations, different grades on my property,
It's at the bottom. Oh, no,
and
it's-
every side of my property has a different adjacent grade. How do you determine what the nearest adjacent grade is if the top of my ridge of my house is in the middle?
Yeah,
Because this
right. So I can
is
put,
the data point right here.
yeah.
This is my data point,
So I can put your mind at ease, Wendy.
10 feet. This is 35 feet, so that's 45 feet from there.
Yeah. So we don't use a reference datum with the parallel plane. That, you don't need it. The topography is the reference datum. And so it's 35 feet from there. And so I need that bottom picture just below that one. Yeah, leave it just like that, perfect. So on your other elevation, you can see I've, tried to draw in that green line, which is, I believe, the grade, and then you mirror that up 35 feet, your entire house is within that envelope, front to back, side to side. So I think one of the things that you're thinking is that you have to measure the overall the way we always have, but that's actually not the case. That's kind of punitive. It allows you to measure from the adjacent grade, which is where the impact is. So if you have a house that is stepping up a hill, it doesn't matter that if from here to the high point could be 60 feet. I don't know. We're not restricting that, because we want you to allow you to build with the grade and then measure where the impact is with the adjacent grade. So your house would never be measured as a kind of overall, like from the street behind, looking up at the high point, which you can't even see. I don't know if the 27 feet is wrong from your grade up to that point,
Right here is our lowest grade, right? Right here is our lowest grade.
on that drawing, yeah.
Up to here is 10 feet. From here up is 35 feet. So this is 45 feet.
Well, Well, your line goes above your house. Your 35-foot line is hovering pretty high up. When you, on your thing,
This is 35 feet.
yeah.
This is 33 feet. So from here to here is 43 feet. This would be 41 feet.
Well, that's not how I measured it, but,
I mean, I have the
yeah.
actual approved.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why I'm like confused, because I don't know. I just was like, maybe I can make this make sense.
Well,
and
in
I'm
your
gonna take my building
basement
plans.
doesn't count. You take that grade in that photo there, and you just take that grade straight across, because that's an existing depression, yeah, in your property. So you're allowed to average that back out. You can use the grade.
So it doesn't still make sense to me. I don't understand how it,
Duke?
I mean, it adds up to 41 feet if no point of any house can be higher than 35 feet.
wish
I
I
don't
could have a
understand how that
scale.
would be allowed.
I wish I had a scale, because I can't really,
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the west elevation, it's in scale.
yeah.
That's why I brought that one with me specifically. So at the bottom, it's that picture right there is the west elevation, and it has where the lowest grade is the orange line. The yellow line is where when we built the house, that's the datum. That's 10 feet above the lowest grade, and then the highest point is the green line, which is 3 feet above the highest point of the roof. So that's the top of the chimney. So that adds up to 43 feet.
Okay, I still scale it like 35 feet, Wendy. If all I can do is take your note here for 32 feet, make a little mark, move it down, and there's about 3 extra feet that adds up to like 35 feet at your peak. And I can drag that along, and it's still,
The lower floor is that bottom line right here.
yeah, I'm looking at grade. I'm not looking at your floor. That's what matters.
Well, the lower floor is actually at grade here, is the thing.
Okay.
This is the lower floor.
Yeah, I
and
see
this is
that.
at grade.
Yeah.
Then I have the datum point, which is 10, and then I go up, and then I go,
Okay.
this is 35 from the datum point,
Yeah.
so this is 30,
Okay.
33 from the
But
datum point.
you
so that's
see,
41.
you've got 32 feet and you've got 8 feet from grade to all the way up here. So that's 40 feet, right? 32 and 8.
From here to
But
here,
your
this is
roof
grade.
looks to be about 5 feet lower than that upper line. So I still get,
The
Yeah, I'm-
roof line is so from here to the highest point of my roof. The ridge is 41 feet. From the base right here at
Mhm.
grade.
well,
to
that's
the
not
ridge
what
is
this
41
says.
No, that's, yeah, I don't understand either. I'm having trouble making this out as well. It looks like the green line that you define 35 feet at is way above your roof.
35 feet is the top of my chimney.
Chimneys
Three-
don't
But the
count.
chimney doesn't count.
3 feet below that is where I'm showing you the ridge line is. Otherwise, I'd be at 43 feet, but I'm at 41 feet.
That math doesn't add for me.
Yeah, I don't see it.
It's definitely not 35 feet.
Yeah, I don't know.
Could,
It's definitely not
Yeah,
27 feet.
Let's see. If
Well-
we- yeah.
So anyhow, this is my concern, right? I can't comment on it if I don't understand it.
Yeah, even if you average the points.
that's for sure.
You know, because all of these contours are somewhat arbitrary. You know, they're an estimate based on somebody's survey points. And so even if we were to take a line from here to here and clean up this contour, we're talking inches, but I still don't see your math matching what you're saying. I mean, I just don't see it here. I see 32 feet and I see 8 feet, which is 40 feet, but your roof appears, to be, you say, 3 feet lower.
I think I think that 8 feet is probably 9 feet, but if you look at the actual roof line to the lower floor, that's 41 feet.
So that grade is higher than your finished floor.
Well, and that's the thing. The grade on this side of the house is lower than the grade on the other side of the house, which is way lower than the grade on the front of the house, which is higher than the grade on the back of the house. So I have 4 different grades. Which one are we looking at? Well, I'm looking at the lowest grade. If I'm looking at the lowest grade, that's the orange line. But we didn't build at the orange line. We built up at the lower floor, right there where it's the lower floor.
So in plan, the high point of your roof is actually a very small percentage because you have a shallow sloping hipped roof. And so your high point is actually a very small percentage of your overall. And so it shouldn't be punitive. You know, I don't think that it's, you know, I think that there's some, you know, average grade here, and finding that high point is within, you know, some close approximation of 35 feet based on what I'm seeing. And I'm working off a photograph of a screen that I have to download and clean up, but I, you know, find your dimensions and try and create something that allows me to do that. But
The way that I read it, and like I said, I could be wrong, but the way I read it is if I were to rebuild my house under the rules that would be in place, I would not be allowed to put the second floor on, or else I would have to shrink my floors down and not have the 11-foot ceilings, ceiling height, because I would have to have no point of my house be taller than 35 feet. From any grade, it can't be taller than 35 feet.
Not higher than 35 feet directly downward. Okay, so you have a vertical line. Consider it walking around your property with a 35-foot pole and putting it straight up and down.
which is what those red lines are.
Right.
It's a
And
35-foot
that's it.
pole.
That's 35 feet. We
That's
don't
not-
care.
that's
It doesn't
35
downslope
plus
from that.
8.
Downslope
I don't
from
think
that
so.
doesn't count. It doesn't
If you
matter.
put a pole in the center of my house from
Yeah.
my basement
Right.
to the ridge,
No,
not
no,
doing
no,
that.
not from your basement. From the original grade.
the basement is my original grade.
And we have put in there a 25-foot thing because of houses that are being knocked down. And some of them have garages in them,
Existing,
like
yeah.
yours did. We put in that 25-foot average space to allow you to continue what would be the original grade. And that becomes your measuring point, to interpolate the original grade. There are a number of houses that aren't unlike yours in Rollingwood because they're being knocked down. And we thought we did not want to penalize anyone who happened to have a basement in the heritage house that they're replacing. So we're trying to put back the topography minus the garage.
You know what would be helpful for me? Would you go to the diagram and just point to me and show me how you're measuring it? Like from this elevation right here, will you just show me what you mean? Because I think that I'm a visual learner and that would help me
Right.
to understand.
Yeah, I'm still trying to find the drawing.
Well,
Let me,
leave this to Alex.
Wendy, I think your basement was the basement of the original house was the original grade, because I don't think they even finished the.
We built right where the
That's what
other
I
house was.
remember.
We just, the foundation crumbled, so we had to pour a
Yeah.
new foundation.
Yeah.
So I pulled this line off of, sorry, you touched me, off of the dimension I got over here. And then I drew in the plane that you have. I just highlighted the ground plane there. And then I mirrored it up 35 feet with my pole. But if you drag this pole along your grade, your house, you know, maybe, you know, who knows what, there's some fudging
Just, it, yeah,
not 43 feet.
okay.
That's how tall my house is, from grade.
But you're not showing that.
Yeah,
That's not what this
This
says.
is the plan, and it shows what,
right,
Your house does not go up to here.
yeah.
right, I mean, if it went up to there.
I think maybe we ought to take this one offline, okay? Because I know that other people want to speak. Folks, we have a 7 o'clock drop dead. So, I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to say something. Otherwise, we're going to have to ask you to come back to another meeting. But thank you. Thanks for this, and we'll look at it and study it, and maybe we can go offline and try to figure out the answer to your question. So, please.
My name's Debbie Arno. I live at 304 Inwood. I just wanted to say thank you. I felt I'm very not involved, and I felt that the communication was really good because typically I don't get notifications and things like that. So I thought this survey was just that. It was a survey for input, which I appreciate it. And I do think that I love the idea of a height restriction. How you get there, I know, has been challenging. And I do think that because the lot prices and things are so expensive, it's going to promote a lot of people building much more of their lot than what you would typically see. I think that's just the trend that you're going to see. And if we don't want that as a community, which I'm against, I live on a pretty gently sloping lot, and it's a little under an acre, and we have a large home on it at 6,000 square feet, but there's a lot of green space. The house that is being built next to us is twice the size, and 3 floors, was going to be a 4th with a viewing, and that's already underway and whatnot. But they clear cut and cut to the lot line. And I didn't even think that was allowed. So my fence is very unstable at the moment. But I do think it's the people that it's the few exceptions that you don't want, and we all know those homes that are being talked about, but whatnot. But I just want to reiterate that I do love the fact that you're doing a building height restriction. And I do think that there are different topographies and lots all over the city that you're taking into account the slope. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Ryan Clinton. I'm at 4714 Timberline Drive. I also want to thank everyone for your time on this, having served briefly on this one and a lot longer on the strike force, and continuing to serve on the strike force committee, various committees. I know that it takes an enormous amount of time, and that means time away from your families and your jobs, and that is not easy. So thank you for your time. The goal, as I understood from the beginning, it was, in fact, to find some kind of community consensus solution for the community consensus problems. And as I understand the community consensus problem from the time that I spent on the strike force, and also the time I've spent knocking on doors and talking to a lot of people, is there are a few houses that are extraordinarily high, and not necessarily extraordinarily high, but extraordinarily imposing. That there are a few houses that are really imposing, and we have to figure out how to deal with that problem. And in my conversations with most people, it's let's try to deal with that problem in the absolute least restrictive method possible. So figuring out a way to chop off the edges to make sure that we don't have a repeat incident of, I think, roughly 3, maybe 4 or 5, depending on who you ask. I think there are about 3 that are pretty consensus of this is too imposing. And so what I was hoping that we would see out of this, and I think what we got out of the strike force, was a community consensus plan where at the end of the project, the community was like, yeah, we get this. This seems fair. And I don't know that there's anybody who has read that plan at the end of the day and said, this doesn't seem fair. I was the one who proposed on that committee to do something that was harmful to my own self-interest, as Tom knows, which was to decrease the back setback of buildings on Bee Caves Road, which means that 25 more feet closer to my own personal home, somebody could build on Bee Caves Road. But I think it was the right thing to do because it was the community consensus that we wanted to improve and expand the opportunities to have a walkable Bee Caves Road commercial district, but also to protect the residents that lived along Bee Caves Road, frankly, on Timberline, and the homes off of adjacent to Timberline. And I think we did that. And by and large, if you ask people, have you read it? And they say yes, the answer is, we get it. We think that's a really good community consensus solution. And so that's what I'm hoping that this project will produce at the end, is something that, frankly, is not going to result in the moment that council changes a completely different code. And I think if you do something that's a little radioactive, which I think this is, what we're going to get is a change in 5 or 10 or 15 years to push it back to be less radioactive. The survey is the best indicator of what our consensus views. And the survey absolutely does not support a community consensus view for a parallel plane. 28% is not a community consensus view. It is a data point, but it is not a community consensus. The survey did show that a majority favored tenting, although again, probably not a community consensus in the same, in the same rate, not 75 or 80 or 85, but a majority. But there was no question, and no question of bringing a tenting down to 25 foot, and there was no question that led people to provide support for tenting down to 25 feet. It simply wasn't there. And so, again, I think the goal should be the least restrictive method to solve the most agreed upon community problems. And that's what I think that we should be attempting to do, even though the survey does not, in fact, demonstrate a consensus solution to that. The solution, there has been discussion of an average grade of 25 feet. We have not seen anything that says an average 25 feet area to grade. That has not been posted to backup that I've looked at and has not been circulated to council before that I've seen. So we don't have any ability to discuss or understand a 25-foot average grade because that's not something that we've seen. The survey, the solution that was previously proposed will in fact significantly adversely affect sloped lots by removing the slope lot adjustment, which the slope lot adjustment I think often is incorrectly viewed as having extra feet. It is in fact mathematically, as I worked with Duke and Dave on, it is mathematically intended to make up for the feet that you lose by having, because you can't have a sloped floor. You literally can't have a sloped floor. You can have split level, but you can't have a sloped floor. So mathematically, the adjustment that exists in the current code is intended to make up for that loss that you have from the fact that you cannot have a sloped floor. Whether that's an elegant solution or a good solution is a different question, but it's not extra feet. It's an attempt to mathematically equate the volume that you lose by having a sloped lot. I personally don't like the current code. I think the current code causes problems. I think it can be manipulated. I think it has been manipulated. And this idea of that you choose 35 feet from wherever the highest point in your building plan, obviously you manipulate that by finding the highest point you can on your lot, making sure you have a corner or wall on that 35-foot spot, and then you can have this giant slab underneath it and 35 feet above it. And that's why one of the reasons that we get these hideous houses. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form here to support the current ordinance. I do think that the council did appropriately get rid of the extra 5 feet, so you could actually go to 50 if you count the extra 5 under the ordinance as it existed last year and the year before. So I think the council has gone in the right direction. I think we have to, I do agree that measuring from the absolute highest point in a lot, creates gamesmanship and creates the problem that we face. However, by removing any adjustment for slope, which the current proposal that we know of does, and imposing 25-foot tenting on the sides, which is far lower than anything that the survey suggested, effectively forces split level home building and home design. And I think that is mostly understood that it would do so. I think that the CRCRC is far more comfortable with split level designs than the community is. I don't know of anybody who's spending $2 million to come to Rollingwood with a family and wants multiple levels on their house. They just don't. I have spoken to people who have lots that don't conform because they do have, like Wendy's, if you put the 35-foot pole at every spot on the location, they would be above the 35 feet where the lot slopes downward. And the people that I've spoken to said they probably wouldn't have bought the lot because they don't want a split level. They have kids. We moved, my wife and I moved to Rollingwood because our last home was a split level. We had just had our first kid. He was learning to walk, and we knew we were going to have more, and we didn't want to have multiple baby gates all over the house, to have split level all over the house. That one had 1, 2, 3, 4, I think, different levels because it was a single story on a slope lot. And if you reduce the top so much that you can't create a flat first floor, then you in fact effectively force split level design. And that is not what young families who are spending money to buy in Rollingwood want. And so I would urge you to not do the parallel plane because it is something that families do not want. It's something that people do not want to be forced into. I have also done research, and the best one that I could come up with, the best city that I could come up with was Linwood, Washington. So I do have theirs. Pass out. The first page here is the code, and the second page is their administrative interpretation of the code, which is interesting because it's a little bit more, it actually does it, and it makes an additional adjustment the code doesn't. So what the code does is it defines the building height for 8,400 square feet or more lots at 35 feet, so same as ours. The building height is defined as the vertical distance from the grade to the highest point of the coping of a flat roof, or the deck line of a mantled roof, or the average height of the highest gable of a pitch or hip roof. And so what that does is it gets rid of the incentive to build flat roofs. It doesn't help you. It doesn't buy you any more space to do a flat roof. I think the city of Austin also has an average gable calculation. So it does seem to be something in many other building codes. But it does get rid of that kind of push to flat roofs because it gives you effectively the ability, if you don't have a flat roof, for your roof line to go up. And of course, gabled roofs are softer on the eyes, so they don't look as imposing. Grade is defined as the average of the finished ground level at the center of all exposed walls of the building. So you basically take the whole plan and you look at every wall and you take the middle point of every single wall on the exterior of the building. In the code itself, it says encased walls are parallel to and within 5 feet of a sidewalk, which we don't have, but you could see that this was an attempt to deal with the visual problem of imposing walls, which was that if it's within the 5 feet of the sidewalk, the above ground level at that measuring point is measured from the sidewalk, so down from the slope of the house. And if you flip to the second page, this is the administrative guidance, which I'm not convinced is completely accurate. interpretation of the code, but what it does, I think it's really interesting what it does with the note, which is in the parenthetical below average grade. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, fourth lines, bottom, which is fourth line from the top. Note where the finished ground level slopes away from the exterior walls, which is the thing that causes the problem that we have. I should step back for a moment. When I look at the houses that are the biggest problems in the neighborhood, one of the things that I noticed is that they're not necessarily mathematically higher than the ones that people don't have a problem with. What is happening is that the place where you're viewing that height from is sloped downward considerably from the height. So it is the fact that you continue to slope downward away from the house that makes your viewing point different. And so a 45 or 35 foot might feel like 45, or 45 might feel like 55.
You're talking the distance to street level.
I'm talking to a viewing point of
Yeah.
somebody who's not
Yeah.
on the lot.
Right.
So let's say that there's an example on Rollingwood Drive. Everybody knows it. Don't want to say a name. If you're viewing it actually from down below the measuring point. And so if you're 10 or 15 feet below the measuring point, it seems massive. Even though if you were viewing it at the measuring point, or if the ground was equal to the measuring point, it wouldn't seem as massive. And the same is true of both of the other houses that are the biggest ones that people have a problem with. If you're viewing it, if you're from the public is viewing it from down slope of even at every point, and so it feels even more imposing than it is. And so one of our neighbors whose lot would also definitely not meet, a new house is not on anybody's objection list, beautiful new house, absolutely would not be compliant with a 35-foot pole that you go around. You know, he said, well, is there any city that you know of that deals with that problem, this perspective problem, which is that it feels more imposing if you go downhill and you're looking up at it. And this is the only one that I found, and again, it's not in the code, it's in the administration interpretation of the code that attempts to do that. Where the finished grade ground level slopes away from the exterior walls, the reference plane shall be established by the lowest point within the area between the building and the lot line, or where the lot line is more than 6 feet from the building, between the building and the point 6 feet from the building. So on those lots that are the biggest problems, that measuring point from that middle exterior wall would have to come down even further. Obviously, if you have an average of a 10-foot slope, on average, what this would do is put you at most a 5-foot slope adjustment. If you have, as Jeff has, a 6-foot slope, this would put you at, on average, a 3-foot adjustment. And then if your lot slopes away from your house so that a visual point of the public looking up at the house, it would even come down further because there would be that adjustment for the lot sloping. People have asked me, why am I supporting this? And I want to make clear two things. One is this would not help me. This proposal that I'm making would not help me. I have 60 feet from my highest to lowest point. I have well within 30 feet. Probably 30 feet or more within the buildable if you looked within the setbacks, a 30-foot drop. I probably can't build a good house with this plan, even with mine lot. What I'm attempting to do is come up with a community solution, a solution that allows for some adjustment for slopes, that doesn't force split levels, but that does cut off those worst offenders. So that's what I would urge you to do, is some form of lot averaging that takes into account perspective when necessary. So hopefully we can bring down. So again, all of those worst offenders, the 3 of them, it's my understanding every single one of them is either 10 or 15 feet because they're using that 10 plus they're using another 5 if they could yank it somewhere. That 5's already gone. If they're using a 10 that is not average, if let's say that's not an average 5-foot slope, let's say it's an average 2-foot slope, but they went and grabbed their highest point, so they had 10. That would have been dropped down 8 feet. So if they had, so some of those houses would be dropped down 13 feet under this proposal, which means that I think that solves all of the worst problems without unnecessarily forcing certain designs on people. So thank you very much.
I have a question. First, on the maximum, on this code, the maximum building height is set at 35 feet, and it says 8,400 square feet. Is that for an 8,400 square foot house? Were there other building
8,800
heights?
square foot lot or more. So they have zoning rules. So if your lot is much smaller, you have a smaller height. If your lot is 8,400 square feet, your entire lot is 8,400
Okay.
square feet or more, it's 35.
So this would cover all Rollingwood lots?
Yes,
35
that's right.
feet. And then the other thing is, if this is the one example of, you found of this coding ordinance, why is that? Why isn't it used other places? And did they enact this ordinance, did it take care of whatever supposed problem they were looking at in big mansions or whatever term you want to use?
So I did not do some comprehensive search, so I don't want to say this is, I say this is the one that I found. I don't want to say that I read a million of them and this is the only one that did this. There are, as my understanding from Jeff's architect, is that averaging is a fairly normal thing across the country because he builds houses all across the country, and that lot averaging is a fairly typical way to define a measuring point.
That was option 2 on the survey.
It was, and so, you know, and I take from your inference that it had less support, which it did. I think the issue was what the survey did was it forced you to choose between 3, and they were most restrictive, middle restrictive, and least restrictive. And so I think that we could probably infer people who wanted something more restrictive than average would probably also support averaging if it was between average and doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you combine the people who said, yeah, we want something, then you get a lot closer to a point where people are supporting it.
Would your neighbor you mentioned that said would not be able to build, would they be willing to share their drawings with us so that we could look at it and try and understand what the issue is?
I will ask, but
Okay.
it's just it's a lot that slopes from side to side, very, very hard. I looked at the topography and it looked to be about 18-foot side to side.
Well, it would be nice to be able to test it against some of the things that we're thinking about, just to see if it would work.
Yeah, and so I think the issue there is if they have to be 25 feet from grade at the bottom point, they essentially they just can't build over here. It becomes.
Is that the 10-foot setback?
Yeah.
It's a 10-teen issue and a height issue, both.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not an objectionable house. I mean, it's not, part of it is the way it sits, of course. I mean, you can't legislate design, but the way it sits on the lot and the way it sits on the way that the house next to it sits is there's a whole lot of land between them, and it's a wooded, and so it really doesn't negatively affect your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if it were on a corner of a street and you were looking down at it, if that house were built where the one is that you're talking about, it might have a negative effect. So part of this is like the perspective of where you're looking at it. But they said they can't build. They essentially, because of that lot, they can't build if it's just 35 feet, this walking 35-foot pole. I certainly couldn't on mine, but I think mine is like the perfect example of it has to go to BOA because you just almost can't build on it. And there are a few like mine that I've seen where you can't build on it.
Well, it's good for us to be able to see those things so that we can test kind of those edge case conditions to see if what we're thinking about would capture that.
Well, you're welcome to look. I'll walk you around my lot. You can see it.
No, it's not that.
There's a cliff in the back.
No, don't make us do that.
I showed it to Councilmember Brown, but I told her, please don't. Please be careful near the edge. I promise, Dave, I won't push you. But there's a.
We don't have CRCRC insurance.
There's a cliff at the end of our driveway, and on other areas it kind of waterfalls down. But in the buildable area, like even this wouldn't work because you'd be 15 feet down as your starting point, and which means you couldn't build a second story on the front. So under neither, frankly, I couldn't use the existing code. That's why I only have one story on the front of my house, is because under the existing code, the grade, the plane, the datum is down below.
Yeah.
Is so far down, so you can't have a second story at the front of my house.
Right.
Which I think we would all agree is probably silly, that you can't even have a second story. So the current code wouldn't work for me. The parallel plane really wouldn't work for me because it would mean the roof had to be slanted like this.
There is an example in here, I don't know if you guys saw this, it's a house that was just completed.
Yeah.
I can't find the
Yeah.
photo, I don't have a photo of it.
Yeah,
This one here.
that would be good. Yeah, that'd be
I
good.
traced the drawing, but if this is the street and it drops down, it's got the 45 feet. Incidentally, the roof line actually doesn't parallel plane. Oh, that was pretty. Anyway, so they actually coincidentally just followed the grade. But in their high point is here, which is 35 feet, and then back here,
Would this be
nobody counts that. We don't count that. 'Cause it's,
That's what I don't understand. If you're measuring from grade, you're
that's
counting.
the yellow line is grade.
Okay.
Not
Well,
green
on
is
mine, the green
underground.
would be grade.
Okay, well, one of the options is that if you are facing a green belt, if you are on a, steeply sloping lot, that you can add back in those 10 feet. So, right now, what we have before we even do kind of a special exception or whatever slope allowance, I think this house still works, because this is the high point, just the way they designed it. And this doesn't go edge to edge, it's in the middle.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a good example of some of the things that we're talking about, because it's on a creek, kind of a typical steeply sloping rolling with lot, that, we are trying to capture all of these things.
Yeah.
We're working very hard to capture them in the rules, so.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
Ryan.
thank you.
As
We,
always. Thanks, Ryan.
we appreciate everybody coming this evening.
Does anybody else want to
We
talk?
do, we are,
There's a couple more people if they
we
want
have
to talk.
seven,
I
yeah,
don't wanna,
it's,
we've taken up a lot of
it
time.
is 7 o'clock.
Okay, we have to, we can't let them
Uh,
talk.
Does anybody else have Jerry's on a different item.
No, actually, I think that if, we would invite any and all of people to come back to our next meeting in 2 weeks. And, anything that didn't get covered this evening, we'd like to do it. Certainly, we have plenty to chew on. I'm gonna go home tonight and look at all of this stuff.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to table number 5 through 9 on their
Okay.
agenda to our next meeting
All right.
in 2 weeks.
Okay,
I second that motion.
all right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes
Mr.
carry.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
All right.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye, all right. It is 7:03, and I call this meeting adjourned.